Hello, everyone, and welcome to another Things We Said Today, where we talk about the Beatles in every which way, but uncensored. Well, this is because we just go wherever we want to go and talk whatever we want to talk about. I'm Steve Marinucci, Beatles Examiner, and let me first introduce my three cohorts on the other end of the country. First, the host of Every Little Thing, Mr. Ken Michaels. Hello, Ken.
Hey, Steve. Hi, everybody.
And from Beatle Fan Magazine, one of our two representatives from Beatle Fan Magazine, veteran writer and longtime music fan, Al Sussman.
Hi, Steve. Hello there, everybody.
I'm just having fun here, guys.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. And last but certainly not least, Beatles author and insider and musicologist and all-around nice guy way out there in Maine, Mr. Allan Kozin.
Hello, hey, Steve.
Allan.
Hey, Steve. How you doing? Hello, everyone.
And we won't even get on his case for not being a Red Sox fan. Anyway, this week we're gonna talk about several things. The first thing we want to just throw aside a couple of recent things that have happened. First thing is actually today, last couple of days, Paul McCartney has announced some new concerts. He announced Toronto a couple of days ago. He announced Columbus today. This is Monday the 24th. And there's a newspaper report, although he hasn't announced it yet, that he's going to Detroit, which actually was kind of announced ahead of time by the arena last night in a Twitter post. And then there's also rumors that he's going to do Buffalo, though there's no announcement on that. Anybody want to comment about the revitalization, I guess you can call it, of the tour?
Basically, it's like the tour, like what Dylan does, what they call the unending tour. It's they're not even changing the name; it's still out there, and it just goes on and on, which is fine, hey, as long as he's enjoying himself.
I have a question about all of this for you guys. How do you all feel about this way of announcing tours, not too far, or not tours, but tour dates, instead of announcing the whole tour at the beginning, which most people do, even Dylan does, and McCartney always did, and Ringo always did. But McCartney now is announcing them like 2 or 3 days at a time. And I know that, when we had Rick here, I think that threw his game a little bit, because he likes to plan where he's going and follow, being a fan on the run. Did any of you feel that doing it this way makes it more exciting, which I presume is why he's doing it?
No.
Yeah, I don't either. Yeah, it just.
I don't like it either. I can't. In fact, I can't stand it for several reasons.
It seems weirdly gimmicky to me,
It's actually a good idea publicity-wise, because every few days his name is out in the press, because he's added a new date, so it keeps his name out there. And I think that's a good reason why he does it. He also probably doesn't know his schedule that well in advance. He's always got projects that he's working on that he's aware of, so he works around it. Plus, as we've heard many times, he spends a lot of time, or he tries to. He's so much a family man that he still wants to work his family into his life, especially with Beatrice. Yes. He tries to work around a schedule like that. So he may not know when he has a long block of time put aside that he can set aside for a tour. I don't think he knows. Really?
I don't.
When you book stadiums and you book halls, you can't book those things like 2 months in advance.
Yeah.
And, these things are all, the music business is worked out so far ahead now that, and especially for big shows of this kind, I don't really buy it. I mean, it's a semi-plausible theory, but I kind of think he knows. He's just sort of dribbling them out.
So many times you hear about reports where it's almost like, a date is almost finalized. They're still trying to work out the details. So it could very well be that some of these dates that are announced aren't really, they really are last minute when you hear about them.
I think it all comes down to money. I think he's trying to get as much money as he can. And I personally think this whole thing sucks on a number of levels. Number one, for the fans who especially, find a show. For example, look at these shows being announced now. They'll be, they'll pick and choose to go to a show, and then all of a sudden find a show closer to them.
Right.
And that's the pits. That's really not taking the fans into consideration at all. And the whole idea about the publicity thing. I mean, it does. You do get buzz. I mean, a lot of it is, artificial buzz, because you get people saying, "Well, I know he's coming here," and they don't know he's coming here. And they, guessing he's coming here. That kind of stuff. If he's living on that kind of publicity, if he thinks that kind of buzz is helping him, I really don't think so. What Allan said about tours in advance. You get people. Who else does it this way? U2 doesn't do it this way. Dylan doesn't do it this way. I mean, I think this is really the pits. And I really, not just from the standpoint of, personal standpoint, from having to try and rush around and write 2 and 3 stories, in a day, which I've done, because he's announced a couple of more than one concert in a day. It's just, I think it's lousy. I really, really do. And Paul, if you're listening, stop it.
That's interesting, because I would have thought that, from your standpoint, Steve, that you would actually like it because you'd have that much more to write about on a.
Well, I mean, they despite what people, kind of intimate, there's not a lot of word coming out in advance. There are a couple people that kind of know, but there isn't a lot of. I mean, they're not telling anybody really, and especially now in the case of the internet, once something is known, it's known. Period. There's no holding it back.
Right.
So, but I do think in terms of I think the people who suffer most on this are the fans. Absolutely. I mean, it's not so much me, having to write about it more than once. I mean, that, you just do it. You just do that. Yeah. But it's the fans trying to plan their lives. And it ends up, and some of these shows end up costing them a lot more than they need to. And not everybody has that, has that much money. Yeah. And I think that's really kind of, I don't want to use, I don't know if I want to use the word inconsiderate, but that's kind of what I'm leaning towards. It really is. I
don't know. I agree to some extent, but in many ways I don't. I do not, under any circumstances, think that Paul is doing this for the money. He does not need the money. He's doing this because he likes to go out there and entertain and please people. And there are so many people around the world who would love to see him, who have never seen him before live, and as well as the fans who would see him many, many times over. Maybe not as many as Rick Glover, right. But there are a lot of them out there that wouldn't mind seeing him 5, 10, 15, 20 times. And he's going out there, and he doesn't have to do this at his age. He certainly earned the right to just coast for the rest of his life and not do anything. But by the same token, I also think that it really does make things very difficult if you're trying to plan seeing him, because, like, for example, this past year he played in Philadelphia. And, Rick was there, and Al, you were there. And, when that was announced, obviously I'm thinking to myself, is he going to play any closer?
Right.
Will there be any New York dates? Yeah. How do you plan this? Do you take a chance and buy a ticket now, and then all of a sudden he's playing in New York? And you don't know. But in the case of this year, and also when he played in Albany last year, it turned out to be, it worked out for my benefit because he didn't play any closer. But you never know when he might add another date. But I also know, and it has been reported, that he does try to play a lot of cities that he hasn't played before, or cities that he hasn't played in a long time. And he does make a very concerted effort to do that, as well as hitting the biggest areas. If he doesn't play in New York City, he plays somewhere close to New York City. And but I do think you're being somewhat unfair, Steve, because I don't think he's doing this at all for the money.
Well,
You know,
what I'm saying is they're negotiating deals. That's what's holding these things up. I mean, they're trying to negotiate deals, and so I'm sorry. I do think that. I do think there is money. I mean, no, he doesn't need the money, but I mean, he's making sure he's getting the better deal. And I mean, normally you would think these things would be set up in advance, like everybody else does. Why is he so different? I don't understand. I would love to hear, but they, of course we won't. Why he has to do it this way. I mean, I understand he's not going to tour that he's not touring that much anymore. But I really think I really think this is not the best way to go. Anybody, Allan, you wanna?
Yeah, I have one other thing to say about this, and that's that. I mean, no, he doesn't have to do it this way. The question, I guess, is really why, what he thinks is the benefit of doing this way, and I can't really see what it is. I mean, for someone like you, Steve, who has a column in this, you kind of are bound to cover every time he announced this, because that's, partly it's the subject you're covering.
Yeah.
Other publications, newspapers, I mean, I can tell you, an editor, if you were to go to him every 3 or 4 weeks and say Paul McCartney has announced 3 new dates, he'd sort of, say, get out of here, I mean, they would announce a major tour, sometimes, not all the time, when the tour is announced, and then only if he hasn't toured in, 10 years or something. Like in 1989, it was a big deal, Since then, I'm not sure that, at the times, I'm not sure that we had tour announcements, except to the degree that it was associated with an album, But there's one other thing, and that's that, Paul is, we talked about how this is an inconvenience for the fans who, might go to a distant city and then find out they could have gone to one closer. There's another aspect of that, which is that Paul is supposed to be very, green and ecology conscious. We're eating hamburgers, which makes cows eat grass and do, methane into the air and all. There's this whole thing about how meat eating is unecological. If you are announcing your schedule in such a way that people are having to travel distances that they don't really have to travel because you're going to be playing closer to them, then you are actually causing an unecological situation in a way.
Yeah, it's true.
Yeah.
but I also think,
interesting.
I don't think you're going to see Paul announce a tour with a concentrated period of time where he's doing a lot of dates over a month or 2 months. I don't think that he physically can handle that. It has to be spread out over several days. So I don't know if he can plan a few months in advance. I don't really know. I think he just wants to, he's made the comment that he likes to do less shows because as he's doing each one, it makes him hungry to do it again.
You can announce a 6-month tour with fewer shows in advance and announce at the beginning all the cities you're going to.
Sure you can.
Even if you're only playing twice a month. Why not?
Absolutely. No, I agree with that. Yeah, there's no reason.
And
there's
then
no
especially
reason
for what tickets cost these days, you can, let people towards the end of the tour save up all that time. See, instead of announcing so much closer to the date. I don't know. I just think it's some weird publicity thing, and I'm not sure what he thinks he's gaining or what his publicist thinks they're gaining. It just seems good. The only one who thinks that this may even be rational is Ken of the 4 of us. So I imagine a lot of people out there are sort of scratching their heads and saying, "Why is he doing it this way?"
Oh, I'm not denying the inconvenience of it all.
Okay.
But I just think at this stage in his career, we should be grateful that he's doing anything.
Yeah, but
and the fact that he gives you so much in one show. I understand everything else that you're saying, Allan, the inconvenience of it all. At this stage, I just think that anything that we get now from him, and that also includes any recorded music, he doesn't have to do anything for the rest of his career. I just feel blessed that he's doing anything at this point. But at the same time, yes, I do see how this makes things difficult on the fans.
And look, okay, he wants to do fewer shows, fine, but let's not make it sound like he's, getting wheeled out in his wheelchair. And
Right.
the guy gives like a 3-hour show when he does it.
Yeah.
He's got plenty of energy. He's in better shape than all four of us put together, probably.
Mm-hmm.
True.
And it's a choice for him. I can understand, wanting to do fewer shows, and that isn't even the issue that we're talking about. And yeah, it's great that he's doing it. I think the only question really is, why not just announce the whole tour all at once? I mean, if you add a show here and there, as sometimes people do, something goes really well and there's an extra day, so you add an extra show. But that's not really what he's doing. He's not doing multiple shows in cities anymore. But we may have belabored this too much. But
how far in advance does Dylan announce his? Because he's kind of famed for just nowadays just being on tour all the time.
He announces about 4 months of concerts at a time.
Oh, okay.
And he'll do that several months before the first of them.
Mm-hmm.
And it's great because you can plan your bootleg collecting that way.
Right.
And there's one other thing that is an inconvenience on the fans as well, where Paul is concerned, is that every time that he announces a new show, the pre-sale happens like a few days after that.
Yeah.
So it forces you to make a decision very quickly.
Yeah.
So I know a lot of fans don't like that either.
And that may be a corporate thing more so than even the McCartney organization. It might be they may make the call, saying a few days before the pre-sale, you can announce that you're playing such and such a show. It's possible. I don't know.
Yeah. Well,
and there's one other aspect of this that I think is worth bringing up, and you guys will probably disagree with me, but I think when an artist tours all the time, as Paul does, it may not be as special year to year when you hear that he's playing.
Mm-hmm.
So the fewer dates that an artist has, there may be more of a demand because you have fewer opportunities to see him. So that creates more of a frenzy that way. So, I know that Paul, we keep hearing just about every single year he performs somewhere in the world. And we've been fortunate here in the States that he plays some dates here.
Mm-hmm.
He's been doing that for quite a while. Yeah. But the less he's in your area, the more you want to see him when he does come. So, maybe there's a little bit of that thought being put into it as well. It's more special if there are less shows.
Mm-hmm.
And I know you're going to say, well, still announce them all in advance.
Mm-hmm.
So, but I think that might be, part of the reasoning behind this.
It's possible because when he played, because this recent English tour was the first one he had done in, I think, as the bus goes through the room, that I think that was the first tour he had done in England in at least a couple of years. Possibly more than that, mm-hmm. and I know that particularly the Liverpool show was the first time he had actually played in Liverpool. Of course, he's there a lot because of Lipa and other things, but it was the first concert that he had played in Liverpool in quite some time. So that does kind of make it into a special kind of event. I don't know if it's that special when he plays or when he announces 2 or 3 shows at a time here.
Well, still, I think it could be done. I mean, he's. It could be done differently because he's. I mean, nobody else does this like this. Really, I can't think of anybody else that does this like this. And it's not. I don't think it creates more of a demand. Paul McCartney is not the type of person that needs demand. Really, he's going to get demands no matter where he plays, when he plays. I mean, doing the piecemeal thing isn't gonna create a bigger demand for him. And if he thinks it does, I don't know what to say. But I don't think that.
I don't know if I agree with you. I think if you go back to a time when he used to do several shows in the same area, like play Madison Square Garden 4 out of 5 nights, I don't think he would do that now.
No,
I don't know if he would sell out 4 nights in a week at Madison Square Garden
Oh,
at this point in
I
his
think
career. I don't think.
I think he'd sell out. I don't think he'll do it though, for the reason that he doesn't want to tour that much anymore. So.
Well, also he would have to spread the shows out probably over. If he's going to do 4 shows, he'd have to spread it out over a week because he just can't. He can't bounce back vocally. I think that's pretty well documented now.
Right.
That he needs a night or even 2 nights, of not playing to really be at something close to full strength.
Right. So.
Well, I think we kind of disagree on what the demand might be for him.
Mm.
It's much safer for him to do one show in an area, even if it's a stadium show, than to do several shows in the same area that are just as big, or even 4 small shows. I think if you go back to the way Brian Epstein handled the Beatles when they first came here in 1964, he didn't want them to play big venues.
Right.
He wanted to ensure that every show would be a sellout.
Yeah.
And, maybe that instinct is still in Paul now. He wants to make sure that every show that he does is a sellout. And you can't overdo because maybe the demand might not be as great. So there may be some thought to that because, as I said, Paul has been playing in the States on a regular basis for many years now.
Yeah.
So it may not be as special from year to year. It's special to us, but I don't know to the general public if it matters as much because they might think, oh, he'll be back next year.
Yeah.
So there may be that thought put behind it too.
Well, I don't know. I just I don't know. I think we can debate this all day long, and we're not going to get anywhere. But it's interesting that we the way we talked about it. So anyway, thank you guys. Let's move on to. We were going to talk about the George Harrison Dark Horse album.
Oh, before that, you were going to follow up on the 2 items from last week about the young lady.
Okay. Last week we made, thank you, Al. We made mention of Pat Niemi Kubaki's illness, and I think the next day she passed away, and so we want to send out our condolences to her family.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I saw there were a lot of comments about her on Facebook, a lot, and so she was well known. She was known by a lot of people. So, our condolences to Pat. And how's it? And I've noticed Rick's been posting like crazy. How's he doing, Al? Have you talked to him?
I haven't talked to him, but he posted a shot of him noticeably thinner, but out there, no pun intended, with Brian Ray. Apparently, I guess over the weekend.
I saw that, and I wondered, and a couple of people asked, and I didn't see the follow-up, if that had been taken recently, or was that an old picture?
I would think so, because he's noticeably thinner. Rick is, but he's keeping a very upbeat attitude. So
yeah, he definitely is. It's a inspiration to the rest of us. Believe me.
No doubt about it. Although I asked if I did ask him if on Facebook if he had been comparing notes with Jimmy Carter.
Yeah, the two of them should get together.
Yeah.
Okay. Anyway, let's talk about George Harrison Dark Horse. I got to say that as far as George's albums go, this is not one of the ones that I throw out as my favorite. I mean, it's good, and I do tend, I like George's albums anyway, but this one came kind of around the time of the tour, and it starts off with the Harry's on Tour instrumental, and for that reason, it kind of brings reminders of the tour. It does have Ding Dong Ding Dong, which I absolutely adore, and Dark Horse, and Far East Man, which Ron Wood later did a great version of. But as far as this album goes, it's just not, as far as I'm concerned, one of his better albums. Any of you guys want to say anything about this?
Well,
Who wants to start?
I'll start. It's an album that has some excellent songs on it.
Mm-hmm.
But the problem is that George's voice is obviously not up to par on much of the album because of all of the rehearsing he was doing for the the Dark Horse tour toward the end of '74, and possibly another injury that he might have had to his larynx. But the songs actually are, by and large, are pretty good. I do like Harry's on Tour quite a bit. So Sad, which had been released almost exactly a year before George's version by Alvin Lee and Mylon Bieber. I had always liked that version, but I thought that George's version actually topped it. Ding Dong Ding Dong is absolutely a great song, and one of the few, I guess you would call it, New Year's rock songs. Bye Bye Love, though, that rather strange version of the Everly Brothers debut hit with participation by at that point the former Patty Harrison and Eric Clapton. I just thought I've always felt from the time it was released, it's just weird. Just very, whether it's an inside joke or what, but it just didn't, it just doesn't come off as all that much of a joke. But Far East Man is another excellent song. Oh, by and large, it's probably it has some very good songs. It's just that George's execution of them vocally is less than great.
Okay. Who wants to go next? Ken? Al?
I
Allan?
can go next.
Okay, go ahead, Ken.
Overall, I like this album a lot. And the thing is, I don't try to make comparisons to all of George's albums because when we had Darren DeVivo on here, I think he said that George, to him, was the most consistently strong of the four Beatles in their solo careers. And I would tend to agree with him. There's very little from George's solo career in general that I don't care for. I agree with a lot of what Al had to say about the execution of the songs. I like the arrangements of the songs on here, and I think the songs, for the most part, are really strong. I love Harry's on Tour. And that song was done deliberately to be the song to kick off on the road, his concerts. And it fits perfectly. It's very catchy. I love the guitar work. I love the LA Express on there. It's just arranged really well. It's just a great opening cut. And So Sad, I definitely think, is one of his best solo songs. I love the 12-string guitar work that he does on it. And I love the way the song ends with the guitar, very similar in a way to Here Comes the Sun. The melody of So Sad is just absolutely beautiful. And the phrasing of George vocally, which is something I think we never really talk about. Most people don't really talk about with the four Beatles as their gift for how they phrase when they sing songs. He's so unique in the way he does that on many of the songs throughout his solo career, and I love the way he sings even if his voice is hoarse on some of the songs. And to tell you the truth, if you weren't told that his voice was hoarse, you may not think that way. I mean, I don't really hear... There are certain songs where I think his vocals are absolutely fine. Maya Love, I think his vocals are really just great. And that's one standout track, really, on the album. It's a very funky track, and I love the piano work from Billy Preston on that one. Simply Shady is a song that I love a lot. I love the melody behind it. Bye Bye Love, unlike you, Al, I really like that version because it's a very different arrangement of that song. And I like when an artist takes a chance and doesn't just copy the original. I'm sure there's a lot of people who might prefer if George just tried to do it the way the Everly Brothers did. But I also know that George has a warped sense of humor about him where, he's poking fun He's poking fun at the fact that his marriage had failed. And, you got lyrics in there like, I hope she's happy, old Clapper too. We had good rhythm, stuff like that. I love the fact that he's making fun of the situation. So you might think it's kind of weird, but, that was George. George had a weird sense of humor. When people asked him what did he think of Eric Clapton taking his woman away, he said, I'd rather that she was with him than some jerk or some idiot. And that's the way that he looked at it. So it's a very different arrangement of that song, and it's an arrangement that only George can do. George has a style that's all his own, and you either really like it or you find it odd and you find it difficult to deal with. But I like the fact that he went in a different direction with that song. Ding Dong Ding Dong I like a lot. It's a great seasonal song. There aren't too many that I know of about New Year's Eve, and it has taken the place of Auld Lang Syne for me. But it's, I think of it more of a novelty song than anything else, or a seasonal song. And just the title track to Dark Horse I love. It's a very unusual song in the way that it's structured. I love the fact that it starts in with that acoustic intro. I love the arrangement of it. Acoustic guitars with a lot of flutes. How many singles have that kind of an arrangement to it? It's a very different sounding song. Far East Man really has a lot of jazz overtones to it. I remember George saying that he envisioned Frank Sinatra doing this, the same way that John thought of Frank Sinatra for Nobody Loves You When You're Down and Out. And Paul supposedly wrote Suicide for Frank Sinatra. I don't see Sinatra singing any of those songs, and I certainly don't hear him in any way singing Far East Man. But it's a really interesting song that he co-wrote with Ron Wood. And the real treat for me on this album, apart from So Sad, is It Is He, Jai Shri Krishna. I love that song to death. Because it really is, it's, again, acoustic guitars, lots of flutes. It's a lighter version of My Sweet Lord. It's very chant-like, which it is. And I love that approach, as only George could do. Nobody else could write a song like that. And, apart from the fact that he's a great songwriter, you could say this about, John and Paul as songwriters and more recently Ringo. They're so unique as writers. Nobody has a style like each of them. So, who else would write a song like It Is He, Jai Shri Krishna? And I love his voice on that. Overall, I think the songs are really strong. If it wasn't for the fact that there's a few songs in there where you can detect that his voice is hoarse, which never really bothered me all that much to begin with. I mean, I look back at a lot of the recordings that I have, especially the All Things Must Pass outtakes, where George is just playing acoustic guitar, and there are times when he's straining vocally, and I'm used to that. It doesn't bother me. Maybe I'm just, because I've heard so much, I know the recording so well, what they released and a lot of what's unreleased. So, no, overall, I think it's a pretty solid album. There are other albums from George that I think are better, but I think that, unfortunately, this album, the impression that people have is tied in with the tour, which gets a lot of bad press because of the condition of his vocals then. But one thing that really should be pointed out where Dark Horse is concerned, the album, is that while it did hit number 4 on the charts in America, the sales were really hurt by the fact that the album didn't even come out till half the tour was over.
Yeah.
And that was ridiculous. I mean, talk about bad planning there. The tour started in the beginning of November, and the album didn't even come out till December 7th, I believe, in the United States. So here he is playing songs, a few songs anyway, that most people wouldn't even know. And I think that that was planned so poorly. And it's a shame because I do think that the album deserved better than a number 4 status. And I think overall it's a pretty darn good album. And like I said, there are other ones like All Things Must Pass. It's hard to touch that one. And you know how I feel about living in the material world. Sure. And there's so many other great albums from him. Cloud 9, 33 1/3, George Harrison. Those are the top ones for me. But Dark Horse is a pretty solid album overall. There's very little that I would complain about in terms of the quality of the songs. And I do like the production and the arrangements behind them. So those are my thoughts about it.
What I was what you were saying just got me thinking it's interesting that Ding Dong Ding Dong never has picked up anywhere near what Wonderful Christmas Time has gotten. And I think it's a much better song than Wonderful Christmas Time.
Mm-hmm.
I really do love that song, and it's kind of surprising that Wonderful Christmas Time gets so much airplay now, and you either love it or you hate it. I mean, there's a lot of people that hate that, which I don't understand. I don't understand the hate thing.
Well, I think that it's because it's just so overplayed now.
Maybe
Because
that might be it.
These 24-hour, 7-day a week Christmas formats that start, Thanksgiving week, and the number of songs that are in the core of those formats. Since Wonderful Christmas Time is one of them, it just gets played to death. I mean, you almost can't walk into a supermarket or a bank or an office anywhere between Thanksgiving and Christmas and not hear Wonderful Christmas Time.
Right.
And,
right.
Well, I love that song, and I never get tired of it. So, I don't hear it getting played as much as you say, Al. I think that the airplay for that song has diminished. But, being the fan that I am of the Beatles, and one of the many reasons I love them so much is the contrast between the four of them. You can't pick two more different songs than Happy Christmas and Wonderful Christmas Time.
True. And
so that's what's so great about John and Paul.
And the weird thing is that I've never tired of Happy Christmas. I've absolutely never tired. I'll have to admit, there have been times, during certain December anniversaries when it's kind of a tough listen, but otherwise when it's, played again within one of those Christmas formats, I still love it. But to be honest, if I never heard Wonderful Christmas Time again, I wouldn't miss it. But then also, as big a Bruce Springsteen fan as I am, if I never heard his version of Santa Claus is Coming to Town, I wouldn't miss it because it's just been so overplayed. But to Steve's point, yeah, it is too bad that because it's not really a Christmas song per se, Ding Dong Ding Dong doesn't really has gotten really kind of shut out of that holiday airplay.
It's really for New Year's Day and New Year's Eve.
Yeah,
it's not for like Christmas. You can celebrate for a month before Christmas or a few months.
Yeah.
But, who celebrates just New Year's Eve for a long period of time? So
Right. Allan, you're awfully quiet out there.
Let me see. Among Ken's comments, I agreed that It Is He is a really beautiful song, and I actually didn't think any of the rest of you would mention it. And I think that a lot of people overlook it because people got very impatient with the Krishna thing with George. And but it actually, I listened to this album today, and I listened to it last week because there was some thought of discussing it last week, and just like to keep it fresh in my ears. And both times that song really just sort of stood out coming at the end of the record and everything. And the songs that you guys identified as the better ones, Ding Dong, Ding Dong, and So Sad, I agree. I think Bye Bye Love is a mess. I mean, even if Patty and Eric Clapton were not on it, it just is like, what is going on here? Is singing it weird, and the instruments are sort of all over the place, and it's just kind of strange. But knowing the personnel on the track, it's a strange thing to do. But obviously, if they were all game, who are we to say that they shouldn't? If I'm not saying they shouldn't, I just think the track is a bit of a mess. The album as a whole, I think, I agree. It gets bad press because of the tour. I don't think the singing on the album is nearly as bad as the singing on the tour was. The tour really wrecked his voice. I mean, he had gone from singing, maybe one song a night in a half-hour set to being the front guy. And I think he wasn't prepared for how much of a toll that would take on his voice, a voice that isn't in shape for that kind of thing. But when I was listening to Dark Horse, generally speaking, just a general comment about the album and maybe George's albums in general, he has a sound on these records that is unlike anybody else's. It's unlike the sound he had when he sang on Beatles records, even his own songs. There is something about his arrangements, the way the strings sound, the use of the slide, the use of the choices of instruments, the way his voice is. It just sounds like a George record and like nobody else. And you may not like it or you may like it, but it's a very unique thumbprint. And he came up with it, I think, really quickly after the Beatles broke up. And
Right.
and I think that's it's just an interesting thing, that whatever personality he had as a songwriter within the Beatles, it still sort of fit the Beatles' texture and sound. But when he went off on his own, I mean, All Things Must Pass doesn't have the kind of sound that I'm talking about. It's a great album. It's probably his best album, and they're his songs, but I think he hadn't quite developed it yet until maybe Living in the Material World, and then on Dark Horse, it's like full throttle. It's just it's very hard to explain what I mean, because it's always hard to capture sound in words. But you listen to Ding Dong Ding Dong, you listen to Far East Man, and It Is He. There's just something very, very George accent about every aspect of it, not just his voice. I mean, even if these were just instrumental tracks, you would listen to it and you'd say, yeah, that's a George record, isn't it? So that was one thing about this album that really struck me, that it has that sound. So some songs are better than others. Some performances are better than others. I think it's probably on the lower half of George's albums for me as an album. But it's got plenty of good stuff on it, and it has that sound. So that's what I think.
Okay.
That's very interesting, that one comment you made there, Allan, about even if you didn't hear George's vocals, you would probably know from the backing tracks. And even if you remove slide guitar, even if you remove the backing tracks, you'd still figure out that it's a George song.
Yeah.
There is something in his compositions. There's the chords that he uses, the chord progressions that he uses that are unique to him. And he also, even more so than John and Paul, very often uses very odd chords in his songs that somehow fit his songs.
Yeah.
But, as I was saying before, John, Paul, and George as songwriters are so distinctive as songwriters. They have their own styles. And, you either love each one of their styles or you don't. And everybody has their own preferences. But
and George as a guitarist is if you listen to not only the Beatles songs and his solo songs, but if you listen to the songs that he did with other people away from from Beatles, there's a very distinctive, you can almost tell, even if you don't know, that you can figure out that it's George on there.
Very underrated.
There's some I did a few years ago, I put together some collections of those things that he had done, those guest shots he had done on other album or on other artists' records, and they're all gorgeous. They're all there's one with Dwayne Eddy, and I can't remember, a theme for something important.
Really important.
Really important. That is absolutely beautiful. Absolutely beautiful. That's one of my all-time favorite records. And so, but yeah, I mean, there's all of those, so many of those type of things. But anyway, so
there's something to be said about an artist being unique.
Yeah.
In every aspect. I mean, when you hear a George Harrison slide guitar solo, you know it's George Harrison.
Right.
And that's not something that you can say about every musician that's out there.
No.
And it's the same thing with John, Paul, and George, and to a lesser degree Ringo, as songwriters. or also Ringo as a drummer. You know it's
Right.
Ringo.
Mm-hmm.
You just know it's him.
I was going to say, as a drummer, yeah, you can definitely tell Ringo. Actually, Paul the same way. More on Beatle records, I think, than outside of Beatle records, especially now. But yeah, you can, that's definitely the case. But anyway, um,
Yeah,
what,
George he's a very underrated guitarist.
hmm
I think the problem is that being as personally close as he was to Eric Clapton, I think he tends to kind of be lost in Clapton's shadow.
right.
But he's on his own. He's a very very distinctive and very very good and versatile guitarist.
hmm
Well, not only that, but we tend to admire the musicians that do a lot of solos, and George did solos, but they were usually brief, and they were absolutely what was necessary on the records.
Right.
And it's also what he did in terms of rhythm and in the backing of his records and Beatle records. But he's not known for being someone that stands there and does a guitar solo for
Right.
3 minutes.
Yeah.
He's not one of those people, and we tend to the rock fans tend to look at those people as though they are the greatest musicians, the ones that can improvise the most, as opposed to artists who complement other musicians better.
Right.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, and the Beatles were always so good at complimenting each other in every aspect. So, if it would have hurt the record if Ringo had done a solo on a certain song instead of stepping back and letting the song speak for itself and the other instrumentation, he would step back.
Yeah.
He would know what's right for the record. And it's the same thing with George.
Yeah.
I was just talking about. I love the song "Cheer Down" from George,
Sure.
and that's one of the rare moments when he's playing slide guitar, and it's going on and on and on. It really doesn't happen. On most of George's solo work, or his work with the Beatles. He's great at a very concise solo. The solo in something is as iconic as you can get, and it's everything that you need in the record. You don't need any more than that. They're very skillful. All four Beatles are at giving you what was necessary for the song, instead of everything being about themselves
Right.
individually. So, and that carried over into their solo work.
Yeah.
Right. Right.
And also,
Okay.
one other thing about
Go ahead.
Dark Horse is that in that period, when we were all a lot younger, there were the complaints about the quote unquote preachiness of a lot of George's songs, particularly on Living in the Material World, and then again on Extra Texture. And yet on Dark Horse, there's very little of that. There really are very few songs about spiritualism on that album, and so.
Well, you've got It Is
Yeah,
He,
sure.
and you've got Maya Love on there,
Right.
But it's not being preachy.
Oh no. I think years later we were able to go back and listen to those albums and realize that no, he wasn't being preachy at all. But like I said, we were all a lot younger and not as knowledgeable then.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Alrighty. We're gonna do something new. We're gonna do a little We're gonna catch everybody by surprise here and see what we come up with. We're each gonna ask a question, and I guess we'll start with Ken. Just because I want to start with Ken. And
I don't
each of
know
us
why, but
I don't know. I just cause. And each of us are going to ask a question of one other member, and we don't know. We have not been clued in on what these questions are, but we're gonna just try it and see where we go. So let's start with you, Ken.
all right. I will direct this question to Allan. All right. I'd like you to pick a song from John's solo career where the lyrics are for you the most powerful and have moved you for some reason. What song from John's solo career, lyrically speaking, has touched you or moved you more than any others?
It may have to be God from the Plastic Ono Band album. It's not just the lyrics; it's the delivery, and this whole litany of things that John doesn't believe in, and then what he does believe in the end, as me, Yoko, and me. It's it's maybe a little self-indulgence. It's maybe a little strange, but on the other hand, he was feeling very embattled at the time, and there's just something about the way he delivers that whole list of names, and it kind of makes you think, well, wait a minute, there are a lot of things that we take for granted as things that we believe in, including the Beatles, which he said he didn't. And it just, I think, makes you think a bit about them. You're not necessarily going to come out and say, oh, I don't believe those things either. It just is, I just found it a very powerful sort of statement of where he was at that moment. So that would be my answer.
Well, that's a great answer right there, because the lyrics there are so powerful, and it tells you where his frame of mind was at that moment. Of course, his mind could change very rapidly, but that's how he felt at that time. Mm-hmm. So, good answer there, Allan.
Thank you.
Okay, we're going to do one more.
Am I asking or answering?
You're asking.
You're asking.
Asking. Okay. All right. I'm gonna pick Steve, as a matter of fact.
Okay.
And I want to find out, when did you first hear the word Beatles? Beatles, not the plug. Mm-hmm. The word Beatles, and was there music accompanying it? And what did you think?
Well, there wasn't music accompanying it, I think I've told the story before, but it was in 7th grade, and I went to a parochial school in Massachusetts. I was in Massachusetts at the time, and my best friend, who was named Kevin, they were dividing the class was divided in groups, as elementary school groups were. I mean, classes were sometimes, and my friend was in a different group than I was, and their group named themselves the Beatles. And I said to him, and I honestly had no idea of what this was, and I also don't remember how much ahead of the Ed Sullivan Show it was. I'd have to think about what year. I can't remember off the top of my head what year it was. But in any event, they call themselves the Beatles, and I said, why did you guys call yourselves the Beatles? And he said, you haven't heard of the Beatles? And I said, no. And he said, oh, they're this great group out of England now. And that was the first, I swear that was the first I'd ever heard. Of course, I heard of them quite a bit after that. And and I was in front of the TV and on the Ed Sullivan Show. And interesting, I did not get to see them when they were in Boston. They played Boston Garden, and they played Suffolk Downs. Mm-hmm. But my father, who was not really a big Beatles fan on the night of the Ed Sullivan Show, he did become a Beatles fan somewhat later, got closer to them than all of us did, because he was working at the time for a company. He was driving a truck in Boston, and he said all of a sudden there was a police motorcade, and they pushed us all over, and this limousine drove by, and it was the Beatles, and we all yelled at him, "What? You got close to him?" But so that was kind of funny. But that was the way I heard about him. And before the Ed Sullivan Show, we went. My mother took us down to my sister and I took us down to one of the local department stores. I can't even remember what the name of it was, and she picked up the Meet the Beatles album in mono, and I picked up the singles with the picture sleeves. So there we go. That's what happened there.
Okay.
All right.
That's about all the time we have for today. God, it really flew by today. On behalf of Ken Michaels, Allan Kozin, and Al Sussman, we'd like to say thank you for tuning in. You can catch the show on podbean.com, on YouTube, on iTunes. Just do a search and we'll be there. Next week, who knows what we're going to talk about? We don't even know. We never know. But that's part of the fun of doing this show. So on behalf of Al, Allan, and Ken, and things we said today, thanks for tuning in, and we will see you next time.